We're going to start by talking about what service learning is, a little bit about what it isn't, and then I'm going to share some examples with you from some of the pilot teachers this year, and in the hopes that you can see the real broad range of kinds of things that we can do for service learning. So service learning, this simple definition for service learning is that it meets outcomes through doing something active and usually community related. So it's all about meeting outcomes in that way. So it connects curriculum outcomes, it connects skills, and it connects community needs or school needs. And we use the term community to mean a broad range of different connections between people. And it's a type of learning where outcomes are met, so you can recognize what outcomes are being met, and you can articulate the outcomes that are being met through this active experience. The active experience ought to be meaningful. It ought to address some type of perceived need in the school or the community. But the biggest thing is that students can meet outcomes through service. And hopefully it enables them to see themselves as valuable members of the community and see their place in the community or the school as citizens. So it's not just about working for a cause, but understanding the underlying things that might have caused that to be an issue in the first place, and then kind of working with uh, real experiences, real life examples to affect change with regard to that issue. So that's what service learning is. Some people are familiar with the term service learning in other contexts. So for example, in the O2 program, so if you're in a 9 to 12 school, you may have colleagues or you yourself might teach in the O2 program. Service learning might include individual placements where they're learning through doing. That is also service learning. Again, they're meeting outcomes in a meaningful active experience. So service learning is a really broad term, but it's any of those activities where outcomes are being met through meaningful and active experiences. So what it isn't, and this is, I guess, probably the other piece that's important to understand, is that it is not volunteer work or volunteer hours. So there are some jurisdictions in Canada where to graduate from high school, you have to have X amount of community service hours over the course of your high school career. That's not what this is. So it's not about volunteering. It's not about charity. It's not about going out and picking a place and checking off how many hours you were there. It's a collaborative piece. And it's about change. We keep saying about change and not charity. It's also not work placement, so it's not the type of learning by doing where you're positioning students out somewhere in the community on an individual basis. So it's voluntary. I think the change and not charity. Education is always at the center. So everything that we're doing in a service learning project connects to an outcome in some way. So comments on what it is and what it isn't before I move on. Questions? Most of you, I turned your microphones on. Feel free to speak, or you can just write a little note. Some of you don't have mics anyway, but I enabled them if you have them, because we're kind of a small group. So you can give a thumbs up, or you can make a comment or ask a question. I'm just going to write down a couple more people joined us. That goes here. So maybe I'll just ask how many people have experience with or have heard of or have seen or heard examples of service learning in the kind of definition that I have it here. So maybe either comment or give a little thumbs up yeah, you've seen it before or heard of it before, just in the context that I'm describing, the way that we're presenting it in Citizenship 9. Yeah, integrated in the DO program, heard about it in another jurisdiction, heard about it in a limited way. Okay, so you have familiar with the sort of idea of it. I'm going to talk today a little bit more about why it is in the Citizenship 9 curriculum and what you might expect as a teacher of it. And Christina, you're correct. There is a lot of confusion about the difference between volunteerism and service learning. And volunteerism is awesome, and we encourage people to volunteer in their communities as a way of contributing and contributing to or contributing and giving back to the community. But you can volunteer without meeting outcomes. But when you're service learning, so that's the difference. And Jill says that she's seen it play out in community-based learning. Yeah, in your building, but you don't teach that course. But to kind of see that it's happening, community-based learning would definitely be moving outcomes that way. So the reason that we have service learning in the curriculum for Citizenship Education 9 comes from that engagement piece. So when folks first gathered way back, even before I came on board, when folks first gathered and were looking to put together a citizenship education course, one of the things that they were very, very clear about, those first stakeholders, those discussion groups, is that we didn't want it to be just a civics course. And I think I mentioned this in my there, that it is not just about learning the content of the political sphere. And so people were very keen to have it be about engagement and being a citizen. And so when the team of teachers came starting in the fall of 2016, and then when the teachers who went ahead and piloted for us this year, when all those folks came on board, they said, well, we can't explain to students how they ought to be involved in their community unless they experience for themselves what it's like to be involved in advocating for something or making a change. And so that's where this outcome was built in. The outcome itself, and I mentioned this the other day, the outcome itself is positioned as outcome number 1 in the curriculum, not because you have to do it first, but because we wanted to draw your attention to it early on in your planning, so that you wouldn't forget about it, and then sort of suddenly you turn the page in May and think, oh my gosh, what was I supposed to do? So the idea is to kind of think about it early on, talk to your kids about it early on, and as you're learning and going through the other outcomes, keep thinking of ways to come back to that service learning, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So the reason that it was there was to give them that experience. And there's a potential to bring a whole lot of the outcomes together depending on what your students choose for this, or you and your class choose for your service learning project. There's potential to bring in financial outcomes, there's potential to bring in governance outcomes, there's potential to bring in digital outcomes, all through the service learning project. So don't think of it as something that's a standalone thing, or it's that you do it in isolation of all the other things. It's really, it can be something that brings together a lot of the outcomes that you're working on, or even as a cumulative piece towards the end, where you can kind of look back on all the things you've learned and bring them together into a nice package. Some teachers are even using it as an assignment or an assessment towards the end, completing the exam. So it's you can bring lots of outcomes together. There's real life examples, so you can see what it means to be involved in something in the planning phases. It connects to that whole piece of responsibility as citizens, and it works to develop the skills and the competencies that we're hoping grade 9 students are developing at their age towards their graduation competence. So that's why it's there, and that's why I'm calling it the capstone, but that's why it exists, and that's why it's positioned where it is. Okay. I'm going to give you a couple of ideas, and then I'm going to tell you what some real people did. So one of the things that folks have been really clear about when they're asking questions is that they're not sure where to start, and they don't know if it's, some people think it's going to take a lot of time, and some people think it's going to take too much time, and they're worried about scheduling. Where do I put it? Is this something that's going to involve people going outside the classroom? Do I need chaperones? Do I need to know how to, use equipment? And the answer to all of those could be no. It could be almost anything. So these are just a list of kinds of categories that a service learning project could involve. So it could involve advocating for a cause or an injustice. So something that is meaningful to students in your class. Maybe they do public service announcements about it. Maybe they decide that they're going to have a day of caring about something. Maybe they embark on a letter writing or an awareness campaign about an issue that they're passionate about. So it could be an advocacy piece. It could be petitioning the municipal council to change something, so the bylaw that makes something better for their age group or another age group, so it could be something along those lines, which involves a lot of discussion, creativity within the class, and some links to community responsibilities or community organizations. It could be an improvement piece, so maybe there's something in the school or the community that the students feel needs either physical improvement or awareness of. It could be something, we have a school, for example, that's street garden. It could be creating a new or safe space at the school. It could be something like expanding a breakfast program so it's every day a week. It could be building something for the school grounds like a bench, but all with the purpose of what need is this addressing. So always coming back. There's not a place for kids to hang out at our age in our community. Maybe we need to talk to the municipality about options. Maybe it's really dark and there's no sidewalk on our side of the street, and when we leave basketball practice and we're walking home, it's not safe. Maybe every place we go to play, people are allowed to have their dogs there and don't clean up after them. So what is it about us at our age 15 or 14, that we see as something that could be helpful in our community? Or is there someone else in the community that needs our help? Or is there something that's missing that we could tap into as young people with the skills and talents that we have? So those are the kinds of sort of categories, and I put a picture here of a book that I'm sending you. So this book is called The Complete Guide to Service Learning, and that's what it's got, like hundreds of ideas. It's meant for you as teachers, and we're sending we're sending one to every school at least, but if you have 3 or 4 or 5 people in your school teaching Citizenship 9 next year, you'll probably get like 2 or 3 of the books. Not one for every teacher, but at least one for every 2 teachers. It's just in English. I'm sorry, it's an American book. It's not in French, but it's really meant for the educator as opposed to the student. And so if you have students who are talking about something environmental and they're really, we want to do something that has to do with the environment, or want something that has to do with poverty, whatever it happens to be that they're jazzed up about, you could maybe look at that and help them brainstorm some ideas. So those are kind of the categories, but it could be really, anything. One of the things that I think is important for everybody to kind of wrap their head around is that it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It doesn't have to cost any money. And it doesn't have to be something that you do outside of your class. It could be, but that really depends on you and your students, how many other people are doing stuff in your school, and how much availability community organizations have for you if you wanted to expand it outside of your classroom. I'm going to give you 3 different examples that sort of run that spectrum of in and out of the classroom. Okay. All right, I put some pictures here from the pilot. These are legitimate, real-life pictures from the pilot teachers this year of their kids doing service learning projects. So we've got a couple of examples. There was a school that did a garden. Okay, so this was a class where that class decided that that's what they wanted to do. So they would have researched the kind of plants that would grow in their area, which is near the ocean. They would have, they built these boxes, so they had to measure and decide how much soil. They did some research and they found out that when you put plants, vegetables in planter boxes instead of in the ground, that they have less risk for frost. So that's why they built the boxes. So that's actually a picture that was taken, I think, last week, hopefully before all the cold weather we had the last couple of days. Hope they didn't ruin the plants. Here's a class who wanted to do something about food security, and this is them visiting the food bank. So I'm going to talk about visits as part of your research for the students in a second. This is just someone's whiteboard. This is a French immersion class, and they were brainstorming, and in that class they put down, they brainstormed over a couple of days, and they left it on the board. And every time someone thought of something, they added to the board until they had a lot of ideas before they even picked what they were doing. This one here is an activity, a service learning activity where a group of students made care packages for a shelter. And so they had someone from the shelter come in and talk to their class about, you know, who uses that particular shelter and why, and what are the things that might be comforting for people who are seeking shelter either in an emergency or for you know, in a hurry or something like that. And so they put together little boxes. There's a class here. This is the same group that was brainstorming over here, and they were looking. Once they came up with a few ideas, they looked online to see who else in the community is already addressing those issues, and is there a way that we can tap into something that's happening already. And then this class here, which is the one with the cenotaph, that was a more physical service learning project. And so I'm just going to share a couple of sort of examples along the spectrum. Oh, and these girls down in the bottom center, their project, they were, it was a class that had a number of students from the band, and so they decided that their project would be bringing music to a local seniors home as a way to use their skills, but also address the need of visits and loneliness among the seniors who are there. So just going to give you 3 examples. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 kind of examples that I sort of picked that were kind of one end to the other and one in between. So the first one is the cenotaph, and the cenotaph group. This is a group in a small village town in Nova Scotia, and their teacher had gone on the Vimy 100 trip last year with her grade 12, and in that process, they had ordered a Vimy oak tree, and the Vimy oak tree arrived in the summer, and by the time fall came, all those grade 12 students had gone on the trip, were gone, and so the teacher had a tree, and so she asked the grade 9 students if they would mind helping her plant the tree, kind of as a legacy. She wasn't looking for service learning. She just thought, well, if I'm going to get any group of kids involved in helping, you know, maybe we'll make a little lesson out of it. So she was more thinking of it as a way of kind of continuing something that someone else is doing. So they walked down to the cenotaph, which is close to school, and they were just going to dig a hole, plant a tree. And when they got there, they noticed that the flagpole was, the paint was all peeling off of it, and there was no flag. I think the cenotaph itself, the stone itself, there was moss. You couldn't necessarily read what was written on the on the stone. The lawn was kind of full of weeds. They noticed that even if somebody was going to come down and look at the cenotaph, it fit, a rocky path. And so they kept asking her questions about why, who looks after this property and who should we, are we allowed to do anything? And all of a sudden this service learning project formed. And so she said, well, why don't you find out? So they called the municipality and they asked whose property it was. They found out that it had been maintained by the Legion, but that all the folks in the Legion had passed in their village, and so there was nobody really kind of looking after the property. The person who lived next door would mow the lawn when he mowed his own lawn, but other than that, that was about it. They found out that all the other legions in Canada around Remembrance Day got this poppy flag, but because they didn't have a legion in the town, they didn't get a flag. So they wrote to the Royal Canadian Legion and said, well, we don't have a legion, but we still have a cenotaph and a flagpole. And so they sent them a flag. They talked to a person from a company that does monuments and grave markers, and asked about the material that the cenotaph was made out of. Was there any way of kind of fixing it up? And also they looked at whether they could get a commemorative stone to put in front of the tree. That guy happened to be their bus driver, and also his family owns a monument company. So they really tapped into some community connections. And what they ended up doing, and there was 31 students, and they sort of took different pieces of that restoration, and their goal was to have it looking nice for Remembrance Day. So they planted tulip bulbs. They built a bench, so they got their technology folks involved. They wanted the bench to have like a mural on it, so they spoke to the art teacher about the kind of materials that they could use, like they outside in North Ireland. And in the end, they took the flagpole down, and they painted it and put it back up. So she also happened to be their ELA teacher, so I know she also incorporated a few ELA outcomes in terms of writing and reflections, and even sort of writing and calling some of those outside organizations to do that in a formal way. But I sort of use that as my example of, we're going to do this. It's going to take us outside of the classroom. It's going to take us a little bit of techniques that maybe the homeroom teacher, the citizenship teacher, maybe building benches isn't her thing, or maybe gardening isn't her thing, but tapping into the people in the community or the people in her community could help her with that. So that is one kind of service learning project. I went down and visited that school, and I asked the students if they liked how they were liking social studies this year, and they said, Miss, this isn't social studies class, this is citizenship. And so it was really kind of nice. They weren't even thinking of it as being a school project. And one of the boys, I was asking him why he liked doing the project, and he said, when we drive by here, he said I can tell my mom that I did that. So it's kind of a nice, they could really see the value to other people in their community, especially when folks came to the Remembrance Day. So that's one example. Okay. On the other end, I've got the prom. So there was another class where this year, same group of pilot teachers, other end of the province, and the teacher was talking with the students about service learning and all about what it was and all about what it wasn't and what could they do. And she said, like, they stared at her and said nothing. They were deer in the headlights. She said it was almost like giving them too much freedom by saying, what do you want to do? And then they didn't know what to do. And so she was really like, she said, I'm going to have to come back to that. And so she thought, okay, well, I'll come back to service learning. Maybe I need more time. Maybe I need a different approach. And so she thought she'd move on to something else. And she was going to move on to kind of a current affairs or current events kind of discussion. And she found this article about poverty in her town. And she thought, okay, there's an interesting article. I'll bring that in, talk in the citizenship class. So she brings it in, and they about, well, how come there's why is poverty increasing in our town? And a couple of the kids said, well, my granddad said that it didn't used to be like that when such and such an industry was here. And they kind of started talking about that. And from that, they also started talking about, you know, what does it mean when you're our age, when you can't do the things that other people can do because of financial hardship? And how does that, you know, how do sometimes people hide that, and how do they deal with that as teenagers? And they got into a really big discussion about what it's like to be a teenager when the family doesn't have the same things that maybe all the friends do. And that led to a discussion about things you might not be able to do if you didn't have the financial means, and the prom came up. Now these are grade 9s, they don't have a prom. They're in a 9 to 12 school, so the only people who have prom are the 12s. But they knew enough about prom that they thought, wow, that's a very expensive thing. And if your family didn't have an income, wouldn't it be difficult to go to a prom? And so they decided that, and that's how their service learning project came about, was because they decided that what they would do would be to raise money to send someone to the prom. So the teacher was aware that you can't just, you know, have a big sale and send someone to the prom. There has to be some learning for the students. So she asked them to, you know, investigate how much it costs. She asked them to investigate poverty in their town. She asked them to investigate organizations in the town that are already working to help alleviate poverty, especially youth organizations. And she asked them to prepare a presentation to give to the administration and guidance, because ultimately that's who was going to pick the person that was going to receive the funds to go to the prom. So the students had to recognize that they would never ever know who the recipient was of their prom. And they kind of had to, you know, that's a pretty mature kind of acceptance thing for someone who's 14 or 15 years old. So so that's what they did. So it was kind of a combination of, yeah, they did some fundraising within the school, but with that was all those learning pieces. It didn't cost them anything to do this from the start, so they didn't have to have any overhead. They didn't have to go buy wood to build planters or anything like that. And they didn't take any time out of class. So this was all done within the class. And they were able to do things like call and write letters to community organizations, talk to the administration, and then plan what kind of fundraisers they were going to do. I think the fundraisers actually took place at lunch. I shouldn't say that none of it was outside of class. I think they sold some like dessert items and things like that at lunch. So as part of what they raised the money for. So that's an example at the sort of other end where it was all done in class. It was about an issue. It was about a raising. In the case of the students, raising awareness amongst themselves, but raising money for, you know, something like that. I really like that example because the teacher did not come in and say, hey, everybody, we're going to have a bake sale and raise money for X. It was the students who thought, you know, and she said the students had a hard time. Some of them felt guilty that they were giving someone a prom instead of school supplies. And they said, you know, we're students, like, school projects, shouldn't we be like raising money for school supplies? And the teacher asked them to look at the kinds of, you know, social and emotional things that go along with poverty, and why it's just as important to be able to do some things with your peers as it is to school supplies. So it was really an interesting conversation. The middle one I put there was food security, and that's kind of a combination of sort of traditional types of service projects that might be going on in schools, but bringing in that meeting outcomes and learning piece. So there was a teacher who was talking about food security and incorporated into that a visit to the food bank so that students could see what a food bank did. So they actually went out of their class on a class trip to have a tour of the food bank and talk to, not to volunteer at the food bank at that time, but to talk to the people who work there about who they service and the kinds of things that that they look for, and why, you know, why is it an issue in our community, and what times of the year would they have more people, and those kinds of things. And from that, they came back to their classroom and they put together presentation that they took to the elementary class. Now, in this case, they had an elementary feeder school, which was neighboring their school, so it was easy to go there. And then there's some schools that are, have primary to 9 or primary to 12 in them. So it's not going to work for everybody that you're going to be able to get to like a feeder school. But that's what they did. So they went to the feeder school, and they gave presentations on food security and food banks, and what they did and why people needed them, and the kinds of things that were the most helpful based on the visit they had had to the food bank. So it was kind of a combination of going out and learning something, and then preparing the presentations in class, going out again in this case. In my school, it would be a lot easier because I could just put it on the wall. So it might not work for everybody. And then what they did was they did have a food drive, but they wanted to kind of educate people as to why they were having a food drive and what kinds of things were most useful for the food bank based on their experience. That teacher took it a step further, and he had them write a little assignment on food security. And one of the things that he said he really found helpful by doing it this way is that a lot of his students who would have had a tremendous amount of difficulty with research and with reading were able to write a very good reflection, very good sort of a little essay on food security based on all of the experience they had, much more so than if you just assigned it as a research piece. So what his message was it didn't really matter how many pounds of food they raised in the food drive. That was not, kids were pretty excited about how much came in, weighing it and all that stuff, but the biggest thing he found as a teacher was how much they learned by doing something that was experiential. So I kind of put that one in the middle, and that's my middle story, where you've got a combination of, going out where it works, but doing some things in class. The message, the teacher with the Cenotaph project, she said that they had the most success when she got out of the way. And even the teacher who ended up with the prom project, who was starting to just give them like free rein and it didn't work, once they got onto an idea, she guided them, but she didn't say this is your goal or this is what we're going to do. So I tell you those three stories to get you thinking about the wide variety of things. One of the teachers mentioned to me today, she said, don't forget that one of the things they can learn through service learning is how to ask for help. So if they need an expert to tell them about something, that they can be the ones to make those phone calls or write those emails. If they think they need a little bit of startup money and they want to go to the principal and say, we'd like to buy the ingredients or the supplies or the paper or the something, to put our project together, we need $50, $100, that to have them come up with a plan that they present is all part of that learning project. So I'm just going to pause there for a second. Douglas had asked earlier, is there only one service class? Can there be a number per class? And that is a fantastic question. When we originally designed it, our vision was like one per class. Some teachers did more than one, some did two. There was one teacher who did, I think, 4 in each class. She had 2 classes, so she was managing or overseeing 8, and I'm not sure if I would do it that way, but it's certainly, what it's not meant to be is a whole bunch of little ones, so like I wouldn't put them in partners and have 12 groups of 2 doing something, because I think that would get unwieldy. The whole idea around it was to come together as a group. What are the talents among in our class? Like, are we artists? Are we shy? Are we really skilled at something? Or what is it we can do as a group? And part of that is kind of listening to each other and pitching those ideas to each other. Christina said she's wondering about the perceived uh, politics of an advocacy. So yeah, you know what? Don't shy away from that. I think I know what you mean. You mean like if we choose issue X, it's going to be seen as being kind of like we're on, you know, a left or right of something. I think that's what you mean. But I wouldn't. I would say if the issue is something that matters to them, as long as it's an issue that, um, you know, you and your administration is comfortable with. Um, I can't foresee any issues with poverty, the environment committee at our schools. Yeah, so if you already have an environment committee, maybe steer away from environment ones or find out if there's something that you can do with them. Yeah, so just kind of see what's already out there. You don't want to duplicate and you don't want to tax the, like you don't want to flood the community with the same stuff. So a lot of times kids will come up with a need that is not being addressed or something they think is not. So yeah, you could do more than one grouping per class. I had one teacher who had 5 sections of this course. That's what she taught this whole assignment. I think she did 1 per class. But I think she might have let them cross over from one class, one project, like they wanted to do the project that 901 was doing or 902, depending on, it really depends on how you want to manage your students. Um, yeah, so just let the kids pick those and check with your admin. And I would discuss the whole notion of service learning with your administration. Just so that I did do a webinar for principals way back when, but just so that they understand that, what the purpose is and the kinds of things that you might be doing. So let me just, I put some I can statements here. I was just kind of thinking about the kids. How will you know it's really working in your class? If learning is taking place at every stage of the process and students can articulate the skills using and they know what outcomes they're achieving when they're doing it, if they can explain the purpose of what they're doing and why they're doing it, and if they can reflect on their experience and recognize their success over the entire project, not just the final result. So those are kind of like criteria, I guess, if you know that it's working in the classroom. One of the things that's really important to understand is that the end result does not have to be what they thought it was going to be at the start for this to be a successful project. So if they thought that they were going to have a community garden that they, sold vegetables and gave the money to somebody else, and the vegetables didn't actually grow, it doesn't mean that that's an unsuccessful project. So what did they learn about working together? What did they learn about themselves as a community? What did they learn about nutrition? What did they learn about the science that was involved? Can they reflect on what they learned looking over the life of the project and not just what happened at the end? It would be, even if that teacher who did the food bank, if they didn't get to the pounds that they were aiming for, he could look and his students could look back over the life of the project and say, we learned about food security, we understand why people need food banks, we understand the kinds of nutritional value in the things that people give to food banks. We know what it's like to speak in front of other people. We know what it's like to bring a message to to another school, like all of those things. So the reflection piece is probably more important than whether the end result was your original goal. And I would say adjust as you go. Feel free with your students to kind of adjust what success looks like and to recognize and to value that success might look different in the end than what you thought it was going to be. So I'll stop there for a second. I'm going to put the outcome on the screen just so that you can be like, okay, what we're going for here. and I'm going to open it up to questions. You can ask your questions out loud, or you can write your questions down, and I will try and answer them for you. That's okay. Thanks, Jill. So any questions or comments or worries? Like one teacher who's at pilot teacher told me today that he was putting off the service learning project as long as he could because he was so worried about losing control and not having enough time and not being able, like he just thought it was going to be so much work. And he said it was the most rewarding part of the course, and his kids just did. He told them yesterday, he said how impressed he was with what they did. So I really think that it's a great way for them to learn. And then they can say things like, this isn't social. So questions or concerns, or do we have a provincial connection with Me to We anymore? Yeah, so you can certainly, the Me to We organization, along with other organizations, do have some ideas that you can tap into. You're certainly free to do that, absolutely. The Canadian Food Grains Bank has a lot of ideas. There's, you know, even if you look at something like your community organizations, I was talking to a teacher the other day, and he's like, our Lions Club probably has all kinds of connections. So yeah, definitely look at community organizations, either nationally or locally. As long as it's a thing that the kids are, as long as it's an issue that the kids are interested in addressing. Absolutely. So one of the things that hasn't come up is assessment. And how do we assess this? And my last webinar, which is taking place on Tuesday next week, is on assessment, and I will be talking about assessment of service learning, as well as other inquiry-based or project-based learning projects. One of the things that somebody a couple of teachers are doing is they're using the reflection piece of the service learning project as part of their final assessment, their final assessment in place of an exam. A question about how do French immersion classes reach out in Anglophone communities and experience there. One French immersion class did their service learning project at the school. Another French immersion class did several different projects within the class, and they reached out to a couple of different community organizations, some of which they could do in French and some of them they didn't. But that's a really good question. I think that maybe when people start to experiment with that this year, if they have some suggestions of how you can encourage your French immersion students to, for example, I'm thinking that let's say you did the food bank. Let's say you were the teacher who did the food bank. I can see having to do the food bank tour perhaps in English, but maybe you could do the presentation in French. So that might be something that could be helpful. That's a really good question. Will the service learning book be expected to be in by the end of June? No. The service learning book, the picture that I showed you, you should be getting that in August. The other books, the red books, and the e-book should be by the end of June. You're welcome, Scott. So I don't know if anyone has any more questions, but these are awesome questions. If anyone has anything else. You're welcome, Frank. You're welcome, Joni. So if anyone, you know, if you think of anything over the next couple of days or anytime, Here's my email address. Feel free to contact me anytime, and I'd be happy to, even if you have a question, you want a pilot teacher to give their experience, and they can certainly do that. I offer their expertise. Um, and the other thing is that we're going to have some links to some of those resources on the in-class online site. So organizations or examples when the teachers are putting together little slideshows with some of their service learning projects as we speak, and they're going to be on our in-school online, our Moodle, to give you some examples as well. So we'll leave it there unless anyone has any questions they want to stick around for. But thank you so much for being part of the webinar, and thank you, Greg, for letting me use this. And I see, like I said at the beginning, I see lots of familiar names, and it's really, really encouraging to see so many of you tuning into the webinars, and so many of you are looking at them after the fact when they've been recorded. And good luck with your service learning project. You're welcome. Bye, Claudine. See you soon. Thanks, Catherine. I think it's cool too. Thanks, Douglas. See you in a few days. Thanks, Candace.